Hackensack Riverkeeper. We are a nonprofit public interest organization. I founded the organization in 1997. Our primary mission is a clean water mission. It's to make sure that the Hackensack River and all of the surrounding waterways meet and exceed the requirements of the Federal Clean Water Act, passed in 1972. Basically what that means is that all of the waterways in this country by this time, by this date, should be both fishable and swimmable, and in the case of the freshwater supplies, they should be drinkable. Unfortunately, the government does not enforce the act to its maximum, and subsequently we are still suffering here, especially here in New Jersey, in the urban centers of New Jersey, such as the Passaic River Watershed, the Hackensack River Watershed, and countless other streams and rivers throughout the state that do not meet the standard. They do not meet the swimming, fishing, or drinking standard. Anybody who's drinking fresh water in New Jersey is drinking filtered water and treated water. You know, when I was a small boy, you could actually go to a stream and you know, take a cup of water out of that stream and drink it and not worry about getting sick. Today I wouldn't do that. Today I wouldn't advise anybody to do that. But anyway, in 1960s there was a group of fishermen on the Hudson River that were getting really upset with the fact that they could no longer harvest the fish from the Hudson River. They were basically being put out of business by pollution, and they banded together, called themselves the Hudson River Fishermen's Association, and began taking on municipalities, corporations, and you know, some businesses that in today's lingo would be called too big to fail. Well, the fishermen didn't care about that. They went after them, took them into court, and forced them to start cleaning up the Hudson River. In 1969, Bob Boyle, who was one of the founding members of the Hudson River Fishermen's Association, wrote a great book called The Hudson River, A Natural and a Non-Natural History. If you ever have a chance to read it, it's got enormous amounts of information about the Hudson River watershed and about activism and about the things that need to be done to preserve and protect our natural resources. In 1983, Bob Boyle took the Hudson River Fishermen's Association to the next level and changed their name to Hudson Riverkeeper, and hired a guy named Johnny Cronin to keep the Hudson River. And John made a really good strategic move. He hired Bobby Kennedy Jr. to be his prosecuting attorney. And that's when Hudson Riverkeeper really started taking companies like Con Edison and General Electric and ExxonMobil and you name it. If they're in the Fortune 500 at some point or other, if they're doing business in New York State, at some point or other they probably got into a tangle with Hudson Riverkeeper. That model that they brought forth onto the Hudson River has now spread. Hackensack Riverkeeper is based upon that model. So we are litigious. We go after polluters. We go after anybody who's doing harm to the waterway. If we find out about it, we either send in the official enforcement people, such as the Attorney General's office, the DEP, the EPA. But in some instances, when we can't get any justification from the state, especially under the current administration, it falls on our shoulders more often than not that we're the ones that have to litigate. We're the ones that have to drag these polluters in front of a judge and have the judge tell them, you got to clean up your act. Today, there are over 280 programs, and we're on 6 continents and in about 34 different countries around the world. People that have adopted the Riverkeeper model, they've adopted we call it the Waterkeeper model today, and the umbrella organization, which I helped found in 1999, is known worldwide as the Waterkeeper Alliance. There are websites for all of these organizations. You can look them up on the internet. You can look and learn everything you need to know about Waterkeeper Alliance and all of the member organizations around the world. The Hackensack River, this is a watershed map, hand-drawn basically watershed map. It's not, I wouldn't suggest you use it for navigation purposes. But at the very top of the map, you can see the small body of water kind of hanging off to the left, that's Lake Lucille. You'll see a picture of Lake Lucille in a minute. And for today's exercise, we'll call that the source of the river. The river actually begins to rise in some wetlands associated with Lake Lucille, and then actually comes together at Lake Lucille. From Lake Lucille, it travels into a series of reservoirs. Lake DeForest, which is wholly in Rockland County, that's that long skinny lake towards the top of the screen. And then from there it goes into Lake Tappan. And from Lake Tappan, it filters on down into the Oradell Reservoir, which is the terminal reservoir. That's where Suez International, the Suez Corporation, which took over the United Water operations, is operating their Haworth treatment plant, and they provide fresh, clean, and healthy drinking water to roughly about 800,000 individuals in eastern Bergen County and North Hudson County, as well as another couple of 100,000 in Rockland County that get their water from Lake DeForest. The river takes on a different character once you get down through the Oradell Reservoir into this section right here. That's the middle of Bergen County. The river flows through Hackensack, it flows through Little Ferry, and then it empties into the Meadowlands. And then from the Meadowlands, it goes down past Jersey City and Kearny into Hudson County and empties into Newark Bay. From Newark Bay, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump across the New York Harbor and Raritan Bay till you get out to Sandy Hook. So the lower half of the river, from the mouth of the river up to Oradell, that's tidal. And the average tide is roughly about 5 to 5.5 feet difference between low tide and high tide. That's a lot of water moves into the estuary, and then a lot of water moves out. Every 6 hours, every 12 hours, we complete the cycle, and it all depends on what phase the moon is in. It can be even higher than 5 to 5.5 feet during the times of a full moon. In the northern part of the watershed, you can see what I have. We call it the controlling water districts that surrounds the reservoir. All of those streams, all of those waterways that you see up there in that box are all Category 1 waters because they are a primary drinking water supply for those individuals that I talked about a minute ago. Then at the lower part of the screen, another box there says the Meadowlands District. The Meadowlands District is roughly about 32 square miles, and it historically is the first big opportunity for regional planning to manifest itself in this country. And it was way back in 1968, 1969 that the New Jersey legislature passed the Meadowlands Reclamation Act and founded the Hackensack Meadowlands Development Commission, which morphed into the New Jersey Meadowlands Commission, which then was disbanded and their duties were turned over to the New Jersey Sports and Exposition Authority. This Sports and Exposition Authority have a huge footprint in the middle of the Meadowlands. Some of you will know it. MetLife Stadium, the racetrack, the old Izod Center, which is currently shuttered, but that's had several names. But that's the property that's actually controlled by the SCA. But the SCA is now in a governance position over the entire 32 square miles. We got some pictures coming up. This is the headwaters of the river up by Lake Lucille. Like I said, the Hackensack River starts out just like a stream, just like a very small body of water. But then it starts building up ahead, and the next thing you know, it's filling up Lake Lucille. Lake Lucille is a recreational area with homes all around it. It was built primarily for summer vacations, but today we have people living there around the calendar year. Nobody goes away now to go back to work. They live there and they commute to their jobs. The river takes on a different character as it flows past Lake Lucille and down into Rockland County. And you can see how bucolic it can look. Yes, this is the Hackensack River. If you drive east from here, if you drive across Route 3 and you look down just before you get into my town of Secaucus, you'll see the river. It doesn't look anything like this. But yeah, this is up in the Rockland County area. You can see how quiet the river is, people canoeing on it, people kayaking on it. In Rockland County is also a very, very large freshwater wetland called the Spatadark Marsh. This was a trip that we took several years ago where we actually went from the source of the river all the way down to the bay. It took 3 days, and we were camping in some really exotic sites, places like Hackensack, New Jersey. You should have seen the looks on their faces when we set up tents and pulled all our boats up. But it was really a lot of fun, and we proved that it could be done, and that was the main thing. Another picture of the river. This is what passes for a waterfalls on the Hackensack River. Unlike the Passaic, which has the great falls, we have this not so great falls. Some quick pictures of the reservoirs. I'll kind of buzz through these as quick as I can. The first one up is Lake DeForest, and you can see it's a very long, skinny lake up in Rockland County, outside of New City, New York. That body of water that you see towards the top of the screen in the distance, that's the Hudson River. That's how close the Hackensack watershed is to the Hudson River watershed. The only thing that separates the Hackensack River from the Hudson River watershed is the Palisades that run along through Rockland into Bergen down into Hudson counties. That's the barrier between the Hudson River watershed and the Hackensack River watershed on the east side. And on the west side, it's basically the Route 17 corridor that goes through Bergen County and the Garden State Parkway. Anything west of the Parkway or Route 17 is basically the Passaic River watershed. Anything east is in the Hackensack. The Hackensack River watershed is roughly about 210 square miles, which is relatively small considering how many people are absolutely dependent on this river for their drinking water and for their recreation. And here's Lake Tappan, I believe. Yeah, Lake Tappan is up now. You can see there's boats out there. That's only because we have a relationship with the water company, and they allow us to bring our boats there once a year so that the public can have an opportunity to get out and enjoy the lake. The rest of the time, the lake is off limits to paddling. They want to protect the water quality. And here's Woodcliff Lake, which is a reserve, truly a reserve reservoir. They bring water from Woodcliff Lake over to Oradell when they have to. And then the Oradell Reservoir, which also is the site of our what we call our Reservoir Challenge. We have a series of races on the reservoir in early June, and they're well attended by people, and people that never had a chance to be on the reservoir because of the gates and because of the fences. They really welcome the chance. You can see everybody's having a good time. Needless to say, in a very, very urbanized area like the Hackensack River watershed, you're going to have some bad actors that move in. And if you take a look at this picture, you see that house up at the top of the hill. Well, the people that own that house at the top of the hill wanted to have a view of the water, so they hired a landscaper to go in and cut down all of the trees between their house and the waterway. The only thing was they didn't own the land between their house and the waterway. That land belongs, it's utility land, it belongs to the water company. And so they were hit with a bill for restoration work, because the only thing that separates the road at the top of that hill from spewing forth all kinds of stuff into the reservoir are those trees, are those buffer areas. They're very, very important. And this is a bad example. This is an even worse example. These people actually took out all the trees from their house down to the lake and then had the nerve to put a putting green right on the shores of the lake so they could practice their golf. And all that land from the hedgerows all the way down to the water doesn't belong to the house. It doesn't belong to the people that own that house. They've been doing a lot of work with those people trying to get them to do the right thing, and I believe that this case is now in the hands of the criminal justice system. This is just another one of those shots where you can see the erosion taking place from all of the stormwater runoff that comes off of the developed landscapes. The tree on that side of the screen over there, you take a look at it, you can see the roots. The good windstorm, that tree's coming right down, and it shouldn't be that way. The reason you see the roots is because the water finds its way right down through that area and just washes away all the soils, and it destabilizes the banks of the creek, banks of the river. And this is what happens when you're out on the river trying to enjoy yourself with those trees they've completely blocked the river to the point where people have to get really creative in how they get around them or under them or through them. Throughout Bergen County, we have a lot of streams that were buried. They buried them because they wanted to build on the land, and they thought that the streams were what they would call an attractive nuisance. Whenever you hear somebody say it's an attractive nuisance, go there, use it, enjoy yourself, because it's only their opinion that it's a nuisance. It could be a great place to go to. The water flowing out of that pipe is the stream trying to find its way back to civilization. It actually was turned into a storm drain by a subdivision. And here's somebody that's out spraying fertilizer or pesticides or something all over their landscaping. You know, I understand people spend a lot of money on that, and they want their homes to look really beautiful, you know, curb appeal and all that stuff. But there are better ways to do it than to spray chemicals all over the place. And you know, if you take a close look in that picture, you can see the applicator bottle is attached to the hose, and she's just spraying it around. One of the problems with all that is that people have a tendency to think if the directions say use a cup, they think that if you use 2 cups, it's going to do a better job. But actually, everything that they throw on their plants eventually winds up into the river, and fertilizers can do the same job that they do on the soil. They do that in the water. They'll cause algae blooms. The algae grows in the water, it dies rapidly, falls to the bottom of the river, falls to the bottom of the water, and then there's all the dissolved oxygen in the water, which is essential for fish life, gets used up in the decay process of the algae. So then we wind up with fish kills on the river. You know, it goes on all over, not just in the Hackensack area, it goes on all over the country. People are just not aware of their chemical footprint when they do stuff like this. And this is a shot of the waterworks. This is a couple of $1 billion worth of technology that goes into treating that water. That's why I'm confident when I say that Suez provides you know, pure, clean, healthy drinking water. You know, if it gets contaminated in the pipes on the way to the consumer, you know, all you can do about that is put a Brita filter on your sink or something, you know. But when it comes out of that plant and starts its journey into people's homes, it's perfectly fine. And there it is. This is the Oradell Dam. This is where things start to change rapidly. On one side of the dam is the fresh water, the drinking water. On the other side of the dam is the tidal water of the river. And the tidal water has salt in it. It's salt water coming in from the ocean. It mixes with the fresh water. We call that brackish water. And brackish water environments are extraordinarily important for you know, a number of plants and animals that thrive in the brackish water environments. We're going to take a quick run down the river through Bergen County now. This is the town of Oradell, just below the dam. As we get down a little further on the river, you're going to see a launch ramp. You know, this doesn't look like much of a launch ramp, does it? You see all that mud in front of it? It's low tide. If you're going to use that launch ramp, you got to go in at high tide, and you got to get out before the tide drops. It has about maybe a 2-hour window of operation around the high tide, and then it's useless the rest of the time. And the river is full of mud there, but if you look across the river on the other side where the water flows faster, there's water flowing there. The reason why all this mud is piled up in front of this launch ramp and throughout the middle section of the Hackensack River, it's really silted in like that, is because overdevelopment causes too much sediment to be pushed into the river off of our developed landscapes, and there's not enough velocity in the water to move those sediments down and out of the river. So when the tide stops moving, the sediments settle onto the bottom of the river, and they accrete, they build up on the bottom of the river. And then when the tide changes back, it moves more sediment back in, and then when it starts going out, it doesn't have enough velocity to move it back out again. So we have this horrible, horrible problem. And I've had conversations with mayors that want to dredge the river, and I try to explain to them all the time, Dredging is what you do. That's the last step that you do. The first thing you got to do is control your stormwater discharges. Fix the stormwater discharges so not so much sediment's getting into the river, and then you want to try and get a project together to dredge out some of this mud. I'd be in favor of that, but not now, because if they don't fix their stormwater systems, it's just going to build up again in about 2 years. And all the money that they would spend on dredging and removing the mud will be for nothing. They'll have to spend it all over again. But it doesn't bother the snapping turtles and stuff that we have in the river. You can see this guy, he just gets up on that mud and makes his way. That's probably a big female, and this was a spring picture, so she was crawling up onto the shoreline looking for some gravel to dig in to lay her eggs. Just another shot of the river. This is what it looks like in Teaneck, New Jersey. Teaneck is one of the biggest cities in Bergen County, and yet they have a greenway that runs along the entire Hackensack River in Teaneck. And it's maintained primarily by volunteers in the town, the Friends of the Greenway. Great bunch of folks, good allies to Riverkeeper. Historically, the river is significant. Matter of fact, New Jersey is extraordinarily significant. They never taught it when I went to school, but we learned about the Battle of Yorktown, and we learned about other battles that took place during the Revolutionary War. But no one took the time to explain how strategic the Hackensack River was during the Revolutionary War. That house that you see on the screen, today we call that the von Steuben House. It was the Zabriskie homestead. The Zabriskie family were Tories. They sided with the British. But they had one strategic thing that was on their property, and that was the only bridge across the Hackensack River in colonial times. They call it New Bridge Landing, and Washington knew about that bridge. And when he was escaping from Fort Lee to head out to Pennsylvania in 1776, it was around November of 76, he took his troops across that bridge onto the Zabriskie homestead property. And then, as soon as all his troops were safe on the west shore of the Hackensack, he ordered them to burn the bridge, stranding the British on the other side of the river. Nobody wanted to get wet in those days. In November, it's pretty cold, the water's cold. And they couldn't like run home and throw their clothes in the dryer. If they got wet in November, they would be wet and cold probably all winter long, living in the field. So they went out to look for boats. In the meantime, Washington made his escape. You can follow Washington's retreat route all the way out to Pennsylvania. And about 6 weeks later, he recrossed the Delaware River and fought the Battle of Trenton and won the first significant victory of the Revolutionary War right in Trenton, New Jersey. If it was not for his strategic burning of that bridge, the chances are that the British probably would have caught up to them. There would have been a battle somewhere in Bergen County or Passaic County, and who knows what the outcome would have been. It also has a real good moral to that little story, is that it is okay to burn your bridges as long as you do it strategically. This is a shot of the river as it flows through the campus at Fairleigh Dickinson University. Fairleigh Dickinson straddles the river in Hackensack and Teaneck. It's bi-coastal on the river. And for full disclosure, when I started Hackensack Riverkeeper back in '97, in 1998 I went to Fairleigh Dickinson to do a presentation, and one of the professors that was in the room came up to me afterwards and said, would I be interested in moving on to the campus? And he arranged for me to have an office there, and that was my first Riverkeeper office. I was able to grow the organization out of that office to where 4 years later we bought our own building on Main Street in Hackensack. And now I'm up to where I have 7 staff people and a host of part-time people that work for us at our paddling centers and stuff during the summer. And the organization's gone from, when I moved onto the campus there, I was still working as a volunteer, and today we have a completely professional organization. Another shot looking downriver from the campus over towards Hackensack. That's Johnson Park behind those trees. And this is the Losen Slope Creek in Little Ferry. If you're followed what happened during Hurricane Sandy, Little Ferry was one of the hardest hit towns in northern New Jersey because of this creek. They had a gate on it, a tide gate, that the pumps that were supposed to pump the water out of the town failed because there was no electricity. The tide gate was stuck because it was locked down. And so the water that got into the town during the storm, as a result of the storm, couldn't get out of the town until 3 days later, when they were able to actually get some pumps brought in that were big enough to handle that amount of water and then pump it back out to the river. They're still fighting that battle in Little Ferry and Moonachie, and a couple other towns in Bergen County are still trying to recover from that storm. But now we're into the Meadowlands. Like I said earlier, the Meadowlands is a 32 square mile area. It contains 8,400 acres of wetlands, which are primarily used for conservation purposes. Years ago, it wasn't that way. There used to be, and I'll show you a map in a minute here. First, we're going to look at a couple of critters. We've got bald eagles nesting in the Hackensack Meadowlands. We've got young eagles that come in the wintertime and eat seagulls and stuff like that. Northern harrier, another threatened species in New Jersey. We have them nesting in the Meadowlands. Peregrine falcons and Cooper's hawks. All of these birds are on either the threatened or the endangered species list, and we have a reasonably good number of them in the Meadowlands. But the big recovery story is the osprey. Osprey were extinct in New Jersey almost in the 1960s as a result of DDT and hunting. People shot them just because it was fun to shoot them. They had no food value. They had no other, maybe you could make a trophy out of it if you were into taxidermy. But people, would just shoot them out of the sky because it was fun to do. Well, now they're protected. They are on the threatened species list here in New Jersey. And we have 6 active nests in the Meadowlands. And here's a couple of young birds. You see the young bird in the nest working its wings, getting ready to take its first flight. And every year now, we're raising anywhere from 8 to 12 young osprey out of those nests in the Meadowlands, repopulating the whole northern part of the state. Cormorants, these are fishing birds. They dive underwater to catch their fish. There's plenty of fish in the river now. We've gone from about 6 species of fish that could survive in the Hackensack to today, where we have over 65 species of marine life that use the lower Hackensack River during the course of their business of being fishes. And it's a great blue heron in flight, another fish-eating bird, and some egrets floating around in the Stump Farm. I call that the Stump Farm. Actually, the Meadowlands has evolved a great deal, and back in colonial times, most of the Meadowlands were cedar forests, and you see those stumps sticking out of the water. Those are the stumps of cedar trees that died in the early 20th century. And the reason those trees died was because they built a dam on the river. The fresh water could no longer come down and flood the Meadowlands, so the salt water came in with the tide, and the cedar trees were susceptible to salt water. They died almost immediately, and then people went out and harvested that wood and put it to good use. But the point is, we'll never see cedar trees in the Meadowlands again, because over the past 100+ years, the salt has been coming and going every day with the tide, twice a day, and it's permeated the soils and the sediments of the river to the point where it would take hundreds and hundreds of years of fresh water coming through in order to clean it out. So not in my lifetime, not in your lifetime, not in your grandchildren's lifetime would you ever see cedar in the Meadowlands again. And that's if we started trying to restore it tomorrow, and there's nobody trying to do that. Here's some great egrets standing at the mouth of one of the creeks. They stand really carefully and quietly along the sides of the creeks, and when a small fish swims by that they can handle, they reach out with that neck and that beak and they grab it right out of there. And in the evening, let me go back to there. In the evening, they get off the ground. They don't want to be on the mud. They don't want to be down where things go bump in the night, so they go up into the trees And this shot is in Kearny, New Jersey. If anybody's familiar with Hudson County, Kearny, New Jersey, that's what it looks like in the evening when all the egrets start nesting or roosting in the trees. They don't nest in the Meadowlands, these birds, but they do roost there. And that's a snowy egret right there. During the fall, we're invaded usually by shorebirds coming down from the Arctic Circle, heading towards South America for the winter. They usually late August and September, you see flocks this large that are coming through the Meadowlands, and at high tide, they look for places where they can rest. At low tide, they're out on the mudflats picking their sustenance out of the mud. And, you know, for birds like this, habitats like the Meadowlands are extremely important. Without habitats like the Meadowlands dotting the landscape between the Arctic and the South American winter grounds for them, they would die. They would fly so far to try to get to the next habitat, they would exhaust themselves and literally fall right out of the sky. And don't pay any attention to these photo bombers at the bottom of the screen. They're just gulls. Here's a brant. Unlike the Canada geese, which have made themselves at home on all of our athletic fields and all of our corporate lawns throughout New Jersey, the brant is more of a marine bird, a little bit smaller than a Canadian goose or a Canada goose, but they come up to the Hackensack, and usually in the fall you see them. They come in for a couple of days, and they go down to Raritan Bay for the winter. And the next slide is a grebe, and in the inset picture you can actually see the young birds on the mother's back. That's how she gets them across the creeks when they're moving from one side of the creek to the other. They're too small to swim, and if they were swimming, you know, one of those snapping turtles I showed you a picture of could come up and grab them right out of and pull them right down. So in order to protect the species, they've developed this method of transportation where they let the kids climb on their back and then they float across the creek. And this is one of our yellowlegs. It's a shorebird, another one of those birds. These guys come early, they stay late, but they do move around a lot. They don't live in the Meadowlands year-round. Yellow-crowned night herons build their nests along the river. This tree happens to be outside of a townhouse in Secaucus, New Jersey. That's right by the river. And the folks that lived there sent me this picture. And you can see the big picture that's up on the screen now. There's not a lot of leaves on that tree. It's very early in the spring. And so they're getting ready for their nesting season. And I believe that the bird on the right is giving direction to the bird on the left as to what has to be done to make the nest better. So you take this shot, which is a few weeks later, the leaves are out on the trees, and if you look very carefully, you can see that there are 5 young night-crowned herons, yellow-crowned night herons, sitting in that nest. And they sit in that nest, and they grow, and they grow, and they become almost adult-sized, and they're still sitting in the nest. And they wait for their parents to bring crabs back to them to eat. And then eventually they spread their wings and they fly. Milk snakes, we see them every once in a while in the Meadowlands. They're a real good species to have around because they eat rodents. They control the rodent population. And this is the Sawmill Creek Wildlife Management Area right across from Laurel Hill. Laurel Hill is the big rock that you see. If you come up the turnpike from down south and you're heading into Secaucus on the eastern extension of the turnpike, you see this big, huge rock that usually has a lot of Greek letters on the side of it. That's Laurel Hill. We used to call it Snake Hill in the old days. And these are some shots from the top of Snake Hill looking around the Meadowlands. There's plenty of slides here. This here slide is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service put it together. All of that gray and black cross-hatching that you see surrounding that sea of green, well, that's the developed areas. And that sea of green is the Meadowlands, and you see how it stands out. On this side of the map, that right there is Central Park. Yeah, everybody talks about Central Park as being this extraordinary open space, how important it is. Thank you. But take a look at Central Park compared to the Meadowlands. You can probably fit about 10 or 12 Central Parks into the Meadowlands and have some room left over. And this is what the Meadowlands looked like in the 1940s. There were 21,000 acres of wetlands and open spaces, very low habitation. There weren't a lot of homes out there. There weren't a lot of people living in the Meadowlands. It was people were still superstitious about, they called them swamps in those days. They were afraid that the noxious gases of the swamps would come and get them at night, all those kind of crazy things. But after World War II, the Army Corps of Engineers and other, other engineering organizations figured out how to fill in wetlands so that they could start building on them and not worry about things sinking into them. And once they did that, this is the result. This is the 1995, same map, different year. And you can see all those black spots that are now inhabiting the places where there used to be wetlands, where there used to be open space, there used to be habitat. This map is one of the reasons why Hackensack Riverkeeper went to war to save the Meadowlands back in the 90s. I got to tell you, we were successful. But when they wanted to continue to develop it and continue to develop it and continue to develop it, and we convinced them that developing in wetlands was like cutting your foot off to stay alive, and that they needed to preserve the wetlands that were left there. And then there was plenty of opportunities around the Meadowlands to do redevelopment projects. Keeps the development community happy to do redevelopment projects. There's less permitting involved, there's less red tape involved. They can get things done on upland a lot quicker and a lot easier than they can if they tried to do it in wetlands anyway. They finally saw the light in 2004, and that was when the master plan that's still in effect today came into being, which laid a conservation zoning on top of all of the wetlands that were left at that time, the 8,400 acres. The river is a transportation corridor. For years, people depended upon the river to move goods up and down the river from Hackensack to New York, from Hackensack to Hoboken and Newark, and any place else out in the harbor. Most of that commercial traffic is gone, and today we have a lot of transportation crossings. We have the Route 3 bridge, that bridge at the bottom, that's a New Jersey Transit bridge. It was formerly an Erie-Lackawanna bridge. Another railroad bridge in the down position. In the big picture, the insert is that bridge in the up position to allow boats to go through, because it's so close to it runs at grade, so it's close to the water. And if you have a flying bridge on your boat, or you have a tall vessel, you have to call ahead and tell them to open up the bridge for you. They're pretty good about it. And more bridges down in Jersey City. There's dozens of bridges across the river now. Washington would have had his pick of bridges back if they were around back in colonial times. And we have a lot of energy use on the river. Public Service Electric and Gas is our energy provider. They've been a good partner to Riverkeeper over the years, and I'm actually very happy to say that they are in a leadership role in the energy industry. They own more solar than any other energy company, any traditional energy company. And just last week, they bought another huge solar array that's being constructed out in Colorado. When the dust clears on this whole energy business, when we finally put fossil fuels back in the ground where they belong and let them stay in the ground where they belong, Public Service is going to be positioned very well as an energy provider, because they're going to have a very, very large renewable portfolio, while companies around the country like Duke Energy and others are still hammering away with coal and with oil and with gas and fossil fuels, and they don't see that it's only a matter of time until we either destroy the atmosphere of the planet burning fossil fuels, or we suck the last ounce of fossil fuels out of the ground and we have nothing else to burn. And if we're not ready for that date, society is going to crumble. And this is one of the plants. This is what it looked like several years ago. And this is what it looks like today because Public Service invested $800 million in scrubbers so that whatever goes up that stack is about 93 to 94% free of any pollutants. And before this technology over here in these blue and gray buildings was installed, this was one of the dirtiest coal-fired power plants on the East Coast, and now it's probably the cleanest. And this is an outdated plant. This is the old building on the left there was actually opened up so far back that Thomas Edison himself turned the ceremonial key that started the turbines running. That's how old it is. And next to it are a couple of gas turbines that were built, I think, in the 60s. And they're not in use anymore, but Public Service still controls the property. These are what they call in the industry stranded assets. It would cost more to redo these than the profit that they could possibly dream of making after they were done doing it. And that bridge that's kind of like hunkering over on the other side of the screen there, that's the Pulaski Skyway. There's a great book about the Pulaski Skyway. I could talk about that for hours. It's 3.5 miles of steel and concrete that was built during the Depression. And the book is called The Last 3 Miles. And if you come across it in the library, if you come across it in the bookstore, it's definitely worth the reading, especially if you're interested in the environment, civil engineering, politics. It's got it all. It's a true New Jersey story. You know, they made a big HBO special about Atlantic City, right? And the politics there. Well, one of the guys in that show was Frank Hague from Jersey City, and it was when Frank Hague was mayor of Jersey City that this got built, and it got built on his political will. Needless to say, in a less creative time, people thought that the Meadowlands wasn't fit for anything else than to throw garbage in it. We've got about, I guess about 32 known solid waste sites spread out around the Meadowlands. Those are the known ones. There was also midnight dumping that went on, and from time to time somebody tries to do something in the Meadowlands and finds out that the ground is contaminated. Nobody ever knew that until they started digging it up and then found noxious fumes coming out of the soil and had to have it tested. But we're getting ahead of the curve. We're finally getting to the point where most of the garbage dumping has stopped completely, and we have a couple of transfer stations where they move garbage out of the local garbage trucks into big long haul trucks that take them to landfills out in Pennsylvania and Ohio. Putting a cap on a landfill is a technical issue, and I'll show you. This here is the PJP landfill in Jersey City, right on the banks of the river. Shot taken from the deck of my boat. That geotextile membrane is the cap that goes over the top. First thing they do is they consolidate all the trash that's in there, and they sculpt it more or less into a configuration that they can work with. Once they have that done, then they pile a bunch of geological material on top of it and smooth it out, and then they put this geotextile membrane on top, which is a solid fabric that they can weld together with heat, and it covers the entire thing. Water can't pass through, and nothing can come back up. And then when that's done, the next thing they do is they pile about anywhere from 6 to 8 feet of additional geological materials, things like gravel and sand, some river mud if it's available, just to build it up a little bit more above the cap. And then eventually this site is what it looks like now, or this time, because they did away with all the garbage. Now it's got grasses growing on it. In the springtime, it's all wildflowers. It's covered completely in wildflowers. When you drive by, you never know that there was a garbage dump there, except for the fact that it rises up about 30 feet in the air. We're going to build a park there. Hackensack Riverkeeper and Jersey City are partnered up on a Green Acres grant, and it's just a matter of time until that particular piece right in front of you right now is going to be a public park. with great views of the river. And this is the Standard Chlorine Company in Kearny. We sued them. We met them on the battlefield. We won. Actually, we settled with them. They saw the error of their ways and they fixed up the property. The next picture is during the remediation that was going on, and I haven't gotten out there to take a good picture of the property because now those ugly buildings and everything, that's all gone. The cap's in place, the bulkhead's in place so that the poisons in the ground can't come out into the river anymore, and you can go by there on a hot summer day and not smell naphthalene in the air anymore, because naphthalene was one of their big products that they made at that site, which is a known carcinogen. This here is just a picture of the outfall at the Bergen County Utilities Authority. It's a sewage treatment plant that handles the waste for 45 towns in Bergen County. And these guys do a great job. They are our first line of defense against water pollution. And this is going to resonate with everybody in this room. I'm old enough to remember what these rivers were like before we had adequate sewage treatment. It was awful. And we've had generations of people that have grown up since the 1970s that never saw how bad it could get. And so they don't really value their environmental protections as much as they should. Because if we ever repealed the Clean Water Act, if we ever went back to the way things were in the 60s and the 70s, it would take no time at all for the river to turn into an open cesspit. It was awful. And one of the big issues that I've been working on, excuse me, as a riverkeeper, is the concept of combined sewer overflows. Cities like Paterson, Hackensack, Jersey City, Kearny, when they built those cities, there was no need to have sewage treatment plants because they just ran pipes right to the local waterways and discharged everything right into the river. As the Clean Water Act came into being, they had to stop that and they had to go to sewage treatment. But the systems were built to carry stormwater and wastewater in the same pipe. So when there's a big rainstorm, what happens is the pipes fill up and it causes too much pressure within the system, and literally relief doors open up within the system that allows a combination of polluted stormwater and polluted wastewater to flow right out into the local waterways. In New Jersey, we have over 200 of these outfalls, most of them in the northern part of the state. There's some down in Camden, there's one or two in Trenton, but most of them are up in the northern part of the state. And again, we had to sue the New Jersey DEP to get them off their butt. For the first time in New Jersey, they were actually managing these things with an eye to the future of eliminating them completely. In the past, before we became really active on this, the state was allowing them to continuously maintain these nuisances without any look toward the future of getting rid of them. But now we're on track to actually be able to say, someday in the not too distant future that there's no more combined sewer overflows in New Jersey. And if they slide on that, if there's any slippage on that, we stand ready to take them back into court. We do a lot of advocacy and we do a lot of enforcement. These are just a list of a couple of the cases that we've taken on. The biggest case of all, though, is the Honeywell case. Honeywell is a responsible party. They wound up owning a lot of land in Jersey City that was thoroughly contaminated with chromium because one of the companies that they bought was in the chromium manufacturing business. And all of the waste products of their chromium manufacturing were dumped into the wetlands, dumped into the river, and dumped into the city of Jersey City. Well, as a result of our litigation, Honeywell is cleaning up 100 acres of land, and they've cleaned up the chromium deposits that were in the river. And yesterday we were with the Hudson County executive and a couple of representatives from my attorneys and from the Honeywell attorneys, and we dedicated a 300-foot promenade in the town of Secaucus, which I was able to get out of them through one of our settlements. It was a $1.25 million project that we cut the ribbon on just yesterday. If you're down in the Secaucus area, go to Laurel Hill County Park and just take a walk out there. If you fish, drop a line. If you bird, bring your binoculars. But it's a great asset and a great public access asset, which, as I said yesterday during my comments at the ribbon cutting, is our way of providing public access to the northern part of the state, even though Christie's DEP threw the northern part of the state under the bus. And we're now in a position where we have to defend our victory that we got in the appeals court against DEP. They've actually appealed to the Supreme Court in New Jersey to try and have our decision overturned. Our decision was simple. You're not doing it right. Do it right. Because these waterways belong to the people of New Jersey. They don't belong to the DEP, and people have a right to access them. And these are just a few slides of our, slightly outdated slides of our waterfront recreation programs, our eco programs. We do eco cruises on the river, on the bay, and on the Passaic River we work with the city of Newark to do trips over there. The pontoon boats that we use are equipped to handle up to 14 passengers, and the trips usually take around 2 to 2.5 hours. We give people, a good taste of the history of the watershed, what's going on there now, the politics behind it, and after 2.5 hours of being out on the river, you learn a whole lot more about the river than you're ever going to learn reading a book. These are our paddling events. I talked about these earlier. We got to get that old logo off of there. Another one at Lake Tappan. And our splash events that we do in Secaucus in conjunction with the Waterkeeper Alliance. There's Bobby in that picture there. He usually tries to make it to our splash events. I think he's made about 3 out of 5 that we've done. And it's just people out on the river paddling. The next one here is Caitlin's, part of her job that she does for me. She does a lot more than this, but she coordinates our volunteer program. And during the course of the warm weather months, starting this month and right through October, we do anywhere from 20 to 30 river cleanups with volunteers, with companies that want to send their employees out. And Caitlin does all the coordination on that. She runs those things, and she does a great job for me and for the river. And if you want to talk about volunteer opportunities, she's the person to talk to. And you can see we have some pretty robust volunteers. That's one guy in his kayak decided to borrow one of our canoes and turned it into a barge and then filled it up with all that trash out of, that was actually up in Lake Tappan. All that came out of the drinking water supply. Because the people that live around it, they really don't care, unfortunately. They don't realize. Some more pictures of what goes on at a typical cleanup. You get there, you give everybody their equipment, you send them out in the field, send them out on the river in kayaks, or canoes rather, and then when we bring all the garbage back, it literally fills dumpsters full of trash. We have a program that we call the Urban Watershed Education Program. This program has been in effect since the early mid-90s. I helped develop it along with the New Jersey DEP because we have that on-again, off-again relationship depending on who's in the State House. But back then we were able to put this program together, and thousands of middle schoolers have gone through this program. It's usually a 3-day program which consists of classroom work, work in the field, and then on the last day we actually let them go fishing. We take them on a boat ride, we let them go fishing in their local waterways, and they even catch fish. You can see these kids up in Hackensack on the walkway in downtown Hackensack fishing in the river. And we also host a Watershed Ambassador program. Any of you that are getting out of school, I don't know can't tell you guys how old you are, but you know, a lot of people have a hard time finding a job when they're first out of school. AmeriCorps is an opportunity. You get paid a stipend, and New Jersey has an AmeriCorps program called the Watershed Ambassadors. If you're interested in the environment, keep your eyes peeled. I think it's like June or July, they start looking for recruits for the next season. It's a 9-month commitment of time, and we've been a host agency for Watershed Ambassadors since the program started back in 2000. And here's a picture. There was a slide before, I think, if this is the right show, that I was quoted one time in the newspaper that said, you know, if you bring people to the water's edge, you can't keep them out of it. So the water better be clean, otherwise they might get sick. And this is just to show you, this is Secaucus. This is the Hackensack River. This is our launch ramp at Laurel Hill County Park where we put our boats in. We have a kayak and canoe livery there where we rent them to the public. And on a hot day, you go down there and you'll just see people wading in the river. Some people actually sit out on the dock as though it was like a beach somewhere. And when they get warm, they jump in the river, swim around, climb back up on the dock. Of course, we don't endorse that kind of activity, but like I said, you can't keep them out of it. So it's incumbent upon government to make sure that the water quality meets the standards for swimming and for recreation. And this is my last slide. This is the one where I pulled a quote out of my hat. You guys all can see pretty good, you're young, but I'll read it anyway. It says, "We have to remain constantly vigilant to prevent raids by those who would selfishly exploit our common heritage for their private gains. Such raids on our natural resources are not examples of enterprise and initiative. They are attempts to take from all of the people for the benefit of a few." And I didn't make that up, I wish I had. It was President Harry Truman when he dedicated Everglades National Park back in the late 40s. Harry Truman, give him hell, Harry was a conservationist, who knew? But it's true then, it's true now, and 100 years from now it'll be true then too. We have to protect what we have. If we don't, it'll all be gone. It'll all be taken over by corporations. It'll all be polluted and destroyed. And by the time you have your own families and you have your own children, your own grandchildren, stories about places like the Hackensack River will have probably been relegated to the idea of folklore, unless we're very, very vigilant. So thank you very much. I'll do some questions and answers, and I also have Caitlin here, who will also be able to answer some questions. Anybody? Yes?
Back a few slides where the kids were going fishing, there was a sign on the bottom that said danger. What did that say?
Actually, that was a crab sign. They did studies on the blue claw crabs in the Newark Bay complex, which consists of Arthur Kill, Kill Van Call, Newark Bay, the lower Passaic River, and the lower Hackensack River. And the blue claw crabs, which everybody likes to go crab and everybody likes to eat crab, or a lot of people do, they are the most contaminated crabs on the planet, thanks to the Passaic River. The Passaic River is the home of the former Diamond Shamrock site in Newark, and the Diamond Shamrock site is where they dumped untold tons of dioxin-laden sediments into the Passaic River, and then nature took over and started moving those sediments around through the estuary out into Newark Bay, and the crabs, because they live in the mud where the dioxin is, they absorb that dioxin. And so if you eat the crabs out of the Passaic River, the Hackensack River, the Newark Bay complex, the odds are 1 to 1 that you're going to wind up with cancer.
You could eat the fish?
We advise people to do catch and release fishing.
Okay.
And it's advice. Smart people take it, and others feed it to their families. It's a shame, and the problem is, a lot of times it's people that are subsistence fishermen. You know, they're their government subsidies ran out at the end of the month. They need to put protein on the table. The quickest and easiest way to do that is to go down and catch a fish. And they they roll the dice and take their chances.
Are there signs? Because a lot of times.
There's signs. I personally have been involved in getting the word out about the contaminated fish and crab issue since 1991. We've been telling this. We publish it in our newsletter continuously. We talk about it like I am right now in public all the time. And yet, on a nice day, you go down to the Hackensack River and you watch, and you'll see guys that catch fish out of the river. Instead of throwing them right back, they have a pail full of water. They throw the fish in the pail. They take them home and they fry them up and they eat them. And it's really, I used to have a bunch of guys that were in one of the boat clubs on the river. They would always tease me about this. They'd get on my case, you're crazy. I've been eating those crabs all my life and there's nothing wrong with me yet. And I said, yeah, well, the word yet is the operative word in that sentence because it'll come. And unfortunately, not that I like to say I told you so, but I know several of those people that have actually died of cancer in the past 20 years. And they'll never, ever connect it to the fish that they were eating or the crabs that they were eating, Like there's a real breakdown between the medical profession and the outdoor professions. When they go into a hospital, it could be the best hospital in the world, I guarantee you they probably don't ask a patient, have you been eating crabs from the Hackensack River? And considering that New Jersey is one of those places where snowbirds are born, and that means that when they get to be a certain age, the people spread their wings and they go to places like Arizona or Florida to live out their golden years. There's no connection then anymore. There's not even a physical connection to the local waterways, so the doctors in those places are not going to know to ask that question. It's really sad. Anyone else? Yes?
I don't know what river it was, but a few years ago when the state settled with Exxon.
Okay, that's actually the Arthur Kill. The Arthur Kill is an estuarine strait that connects Raritan Bay to Newark Bay. It's not a true river, even though the Dutch thought it was. ExxonMobil has they had it. Now I think it belongs to Phillips 66. It's called the Bayway Refinery. And then they had another site over in Bayonne on the Kilvan Col where they dumped tons of petroleum waste products into wetlands. They filled wetlands illegally. They put their tanks on the wetlands, like they just put a pad in there and then put a gas tank or a fuel tank on it. And, under the previous administrations, when my friend Brad Campbell was the commissioner, and another good friend of mine, Lisa Jackson, became the commissioner after Brad left, they started a civil action against ExxonMobil to get them to pay for all the damage that they did to the environment in northern New Jersey. And the state filed a suit asking for $8.9 billion in damages. And while that case was in litigation, the Christie administration settled that case with Exxon for about 10 cents on the dollar. I think they got like maybe 200 and something million dollars out of it. From 8.9 billion down to 200 and something million. That's a real New York bargain, or a real New Jersey bargain. Currently, there are a couple of people that are running for governor that are determined to overturn that settlement and go back after Exxon. I don't know what their legal precedent is for that. I'm not a lawyer, even though I play one on TV sometimes. People always ask me legal questions, and I have to keep reminding people all the time, I'm not an attorney, so I can't give you legal advice. But if I were you, this is what I would do. I'd get me a good lawyer. So, in the back.
Besides your remediation projects, one of the most expensive things you guys do must be taking these people to court. How are you able to do that?
Excuse me?
How are you able to get the money to take these
because Congress, in their when Congress was functional, and I'm not talking about the current Congress, right? But back in the 70s, when Congress was functional, they passed the Clean Water Act, they passed the National Environmental Policy Act, the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, and they understood, you know, they were career politicians, and they understood that politics might get in the way of enforcing those laws. So they put clauses in each one of those laws that permit citizens to enforce them. If the state or the federal government is incapable or unwilling to enforce any of those laws that I just rattled off, citizens can take those laws and file a case in federal court against the polluter. And when we win, we don't file frivolous lawsuits, and we don't file lawsuits with the idea of losing. When we win, the polluter has to pay our costs, their costs, and the cleanup. And that's the way the law is. And, you know, we've been very lucky to work with some really great attorneys over the years. We used to get a lot of representation from the Rutgers Environmental Law Clinic, which was several full-time staff attorneys that used students that were in the law department there to do a lot of the research work, to do a lot of the writing. It was a way to train the students and get them up and running so that they could go out and work in the real world. And at the same time, they provided representation to a lot of great organizations across the state of New Jersey. The Honeywell case was handled for me by a public interest law firm out of Washington, D.C. By the time we finished with all of our court actions against Honeywell, and our lawyers applied to the court for their fees, including the expert witness fees and stuff like that we accrued during the course of the case, it was over $8 million in legal fees, and Honeywell was on the hook to pay that. If I had to raise that kind of money to bring a case, it would be a long, long time before I could do it. You know, I'm pretty good at raising money. I'm pretty good at growing an organization, but you know, raising that kind of money, that's magic. You know, I'm not there yet. But the law says if you win the case, the polluter pays. And the polluter has to pay. They made millions. In some cases, they made billions destroying the environment. They owe you, they owe us, they owe everybody. At least some of that money has to come back into the communities and get those communities cleaned up and make those communities whole again. And when I use the word communities, I don't mean people's neighborhoods. I mean communities of the river, communities of the land, communities of the sky, all of those natural communities that are out there that they continuously thought. They treated this planet like it was in a going out of business sale or a fire sale. And now it's time to pay the piper. All right? All right, well, thank you all for coming out this afternoon. I'm glad to be here.